The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn to Canada, which saw a significant political shift after its national election Monday. The Conservative Party, led by Prime Minister Stephen Harper, was elected to a majority in the Canadian Parliament, ending 5 years of minority government. Harper's vowed to continue pro-corporate policies that have led critics to label his government the most right-wing in recent Canadian history. But the election also saw major gains for the National Democratic Party, which won enough seats to become the official opposition party for the first time. The NDP nearly tripled its parliamentary seats as both the Liberal Party and the separatist Bloc Québécois suffered major losses. It was the first time the Liberal Party did not finish in either first or second place in a national vote. While the Liberals have long been seen as a centrist party, the NDP's historic surge could herald a new era in which a progressive alternative challenges the ruling government. To discuss the Canadian elections, we're joined by Stephen Lewis, longtime member of the NDP. He led the party in Ontario during the 1970s. He later served as Canada's ambassador to the United Nations in the 80s and later as the UN Special Envoy for HIV/AIDS in Africa, co-founder and co-director of AIDS Free World, an international advocacy group based out of New York. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Stephen Lewis. Talk about these elections, what they mean. What does it mean for Harper's majority? And remember, you're talking to an audience in addition to a Canadian audience, and it was wonderful to be in Canada this past weekend. People all over the world who are not very familiar with Canadian politics.
Right. Well, Stephen Harper is a classic right-wing government, ideologically driven, and now has a majority. And I suspect that 4 or 5 years from now, Canada will be a somewhat different country because the natural progressive instincts of so much of Canada will be diminished by a very right-wing government. But on the other hand, he was elected. It's a democratic society, albeit he only got 40% of the vote, which means that 60% of Canadians wanted an alternative. The unprecedented surge of the New Democratic Party, and I don't think I'm putting that inappropriately as though it was intense partisanship. The surge of the New Democratic Party took everyone aback, and the sweep in the province of Quebec is perhaps one of the most extraordinary moments in Canadian political history over the last 2 or 3 decades, because it means that Quebec has voted for a federalist party to represent their views as part of Canada. They have rejected the separatist, sovereigntist instinct which has prevailed over the last 2 to 3 decades. And that is of great significance because, as it were, and this isn't metaphorical, it brings Quebec back into Canada. So you have in Canada now a rather useful ideological fray with strong conservatives in the government, with a deeply committed left-wing opposition led by a man without guile, Jack Layton, who brought tremendous authority and admiration to his campaign. And the Liberal Party, which always saw itself as the natural government of Canada, may never rise from the ashes. The separatists have been defeated in Quebec. They probably won't be back at the federal level. The Liberals will be struggling for place.
Give us the history of the NDP. I mean, this remarkable moment. It's as if in the United States you have the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, and the Green Party. And now the Green Party has become the second party instead of the Democrats. So when the questions are asked here, for example, you know, are you going to throw away your vote, allow Republicans to win by voting for a Green Party and the Democrats will lose? In Canada, it became, are you going to throw away your vote for voting for the Liberals and not the NDP? And so the NDP became number 2, the main opposition party. What is the history of your party, which you led in Ontario, for example, during the 70s?
Yes. Yes, the party was rooted in what was called the CCF, the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, which was a combination of agrarian support in Western Canada and a good deal of trade union and urban support in Eastern Canada. But we never really had a foothold in the province of Quebec. In 1958, we suffered a terrible defeat politically and were reduced to 8 seats. And out of that, there emerged the New Democratic Party, which was a slightly different formulation, but with a new passion and instinct. And the former Premier of Saskatchewan, one of the most popular of Canadians, Tommy Douglas, came out to lead the party. And that began 50 years. This is our 50th anniversary, Amy. 50 years of a slow progression of social democracy in Canada, gradually winning more and more support. We formed provincial governments in British Columbia, in Saskatchewan, in Manitoba, in Ontario, now in Nova Scotia, but we never had any impressive strength beyond a third-place finish in Canada as a whole. Tommy Douglas was followed by my father, who was the leader and for a while held the balance of power in the 1970s when Pierre Trudeau was head of the Liberal Party. He was followed by Ed Broadbent, who previously got our highest number of seats in the 80s, 43. Now we have 102 and 30% of the vote, and this incredible breakthrough in Quebec. Amy, 2 days ago we had 1 member of parliament in Quebec, 1. This morning we have 59 or 60. It's really quite phenomenal. And as a result, after Ed Broadbent, there came 2 women leaders and now Jack Layton. It's been a slow, progressive build of social democracy.
The NDP is responsible for ushering in Canada's single-payer health care system. In 1962, as you mentioned, the Saskatchewan Premier, Tommy Douglas, who was also NDP's first federal leader, won the passage of single-payer in Saskatchewan, with every other province soon to follow. Now, it's very interesting, especially for viewers and listeners in the United States and in the rest of the world, because Tommy Douglas is the grandfather of Kiefer Sutherland, the actor, you know, the star of 24, for example, which is, by the way, trending today, Kiefer Sutherland, because of the action that took place that killed Osama bin Laden, you know, in sort of 24 style. But in 1983, 3 years before his death, Tommy Douglas talked about health care.
If you want a 2-tiered health program, then just continue the way we're going. And I remind you that in this movement we pledged ourselves 50 years ago that we would provide health care for every man, woman, and child, irrespective of their color, their race, or their financial status. And by God, we're going to do it.
That was the first leader of the NDP. That was Tommy Douglas, responsible for bringing in single-payer health care, first in 1 province, which is interesting because it looks like Vermont in the United States is poised to bring in single-payer health care just in Vermont. Stephen Lewis, the significance of health care as part of the progressive agenda of the New Democratic Party that has now just become the second party of Canada.
Oh, it's visceral to the NDP, Amy. It's in our molecular structure. It's holy writ. We will fight for Medicare to the death and the public health care which is provided in Canada to every single citizen is something of which we're immensely proud. The people of Canada consider health care to be the dominant political issue in any campaign, and there will now be a struggle in the House of Commons, in Parliament, because the Conservative government would like to privatize dimensions of health care. I rather doubt that the Canadian public will permit that, and the NDP will fight very, very hard to maintain what you call the single-payer system. That is one of the things which distinguishes us and identifies the Democratic left.